senior producer, NFL Films, Greg Cosell, joining us, also co-host of ESPN's NFL Matchup Show, and Greg Cosell's appearance on the show, presented by Scott Lawnyard, an official commercial site work partner of the Buffalo Bills. All right, Greg, we're all said and done here in Buffalo after an unfortunate performance, defensively anyway, against the Chiefs, due in part to the fact that they were shorthanded, and we won't dwell on this game too much because we do want to talk to you about the conference title games as well. The biggest surprise for me in the defensive effort, Greg, was the lack of impact from the defensive front, both in the run front and in terms of pass rush. Ed Oliver was not double-teamed a lot in this game, Greg. Joe Thuney owned him.
Yep. No, that was, I think your point's very, very well taken. I think that we kind of expected, and we discussed this last week, that we thought that was a unit that would have to be a factor in the game. Now, we know that Mahomes is difficult to sack and can make plays off script, but still, they were not a factor in the game. And once they were not a factor in the game, it became really difficult. Look, no knock against these players, but, when you have to play Klein and Dotson, neither one is a pass defender, and Klein was he on his couch just 2-3 weeks ago?
Yeah, yes.
So, it just, look, that's just the reality of life. Like I said, it's no knock personally, but, you just get stuck. And they needed to be able to make Mahomes play faster. And sure, he'll always make some plays, but when a team runs 47 offensive plays and averages almost 8 yards per play, and 8 of those 47 plays gain more than 20 yards, that's a tough formula.
Yeah, and it resulted in the Bills. Some of the stats coming out of this game were weird. The Bills rushed for over 180, threw for over 180, didn't turn the ball over, didn't take any sacks, had 35-plus minutes of time of possession. They're the only team in the Super Bowl era to do all of those things and lose. But it happens when you play a guy like Mahomes and the Chiefs, who were the same way. They didn't take any sacks, and they didn't turn it over either. And their run game, I thought, was one of the things that was a little bit more surprising in this game than anything, was their ability to run on the Bills' front. And once again, you get right back to those guys, that the healthiest bunch on the team.
And I would assume that was the reason that and I'm sure this came from Sean McDermott in a lot of meetings before the game, but my guess is that would be one reason why the Bills really did not look to attack in the pass game. Because my guess is they felt that they had to control the ball as much as they possibly could, that they just could not let Mahomes be on the field. Now, again, there's many ways to look at that, but clearly when I watched the tape, and even with my guys on Matchup, when they watched the tape as well, we were struck by the fact that they really did not attack with the pass game at the intermediate and vertical levels at all. I mean, they took a shot here and there. I mean, obviously, he threw the fade to Sherfield. That was a catchable ball. Good defense, but catchable. We know about the play to Diggs. But other than that, they did not really attack in this game at the intermediate to intermediate deeper levels at all. And my guess is that was all game plan. That wasn't no other reason, because just because a team plays, and you know this, Steve, just because a team plays too high safety doesn't mean you can't throw the ball.
Right, and to me, it speaks to a larger issue, and I know we'll talk to you about this later in the offseason, presumably in Indianapolis at the Combine and in the weeks that follow in March and April, but there is a screaming need for a field stretcher in this receiving core, as well as an alpha dog that can line up outside and win and be open even when he's not open, and someone who can eventually replace Stephon Diggs as the number one receiver in this offense. I've been arguing since last year that they needed to make an investment high in the draft. I think it's almost a necessity now going forward that they invest a high draft pick, maybe 2 picks in the first 2 days, on receivers that can help them sooner rather than later.
I couldn't agree more. And, again, that everything I say is based on tape study. I don't think they truly have a number one, and they certainly don't have a field stretcher. So I think that, when you have Josh Allen, you need to invest in your receiving core. You need receivers. We know Kincaid, he's going to be a good player. I think Shakir is going to be a really good number 3 type. He's going to be really good for what he is. But I think they need they need just what you said. I loved your term. They need an alpha dog and they need speed. Because this offense is hamstrung in the pass game by what they're lacking, and it shows up almost in every game.
We talked about this at the end. It dawned on me after the Kansas City game, and we were in the same kind of position last year. Although the season ended with the Bills kind of being dead on their feet after the DeMar Hamlin thing, they were kind of done for a month, but. At the end of last season, when we were watching Cincinnati go to Kansas City and watching Kansas City and Cincinnati have it out, and then watching Kansas City go to the Super Bowl and those teams having it out in those last few weeks of the season, it became painfully obvious last year at this time that you're in an arms race. And as good as the Kansas City defense has played and as good as the Baltimore defense has played, you're still in a score-first league. And
yes.
The Bills never got out of that. Although they had a really nice season, a really good season, they didn't have anybody except Diggs, who came out in the first half of the season, was killing it, and then kind of faded down the stretch. They never got to that point where they were a teams were chasing offensively unless they were chasing Josh.
I would agree with that. And I'm glad to hear you guys say that, because I think the tape tells you that. I mean, that's all you have to look at. The eye in the sky doesn't lie. The tape tells you that they need upgrades at the wide receiver position in order to run a fully dimensional pass game. And I agree with Brownie. I think, maybe they bring someone in free agency as well, but they need to draft players at that position and then have competition. I mean, if Stephon Diggs is still here, fine. But you need to upgrade that position, and you need to upgrade it dimensionally. You need to have a vertical stretcher. You need to have, someone who, in a sense, you need someone who can win one-on-one, and that you feel that when it's 3rd and 7, that you don't always have to scheme, that you can throw him the ball. And, if you don't have that guy, sometimes you can't always out-scheme on every critical down.
Yeah, I would agree. With that in mind, and the games this weekend, let's spin it over to the AFC title game now between the Chiefs and the Ravens. It's hard to expect or anticipate a high-scoring game here, Greg, in light of the fact that you have the number 1 and number 2 scoring defenses in football going against one another, who are also, by the way, number 1 and 2 in sacks this season. Are you anticipating a game in the low 20s? Maybe one team even in the high teens by the time this is all over?
Yeah, one thing I've learned, and obviously Lamar Jackson's had a terrific season, but one thing I think we've probably all learned is it's tough to kind of bet against Mahomes. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say they're going to put up 40. I would never say that anyway. But, I mean, he's just one of those guys. He's different. I remember talking to a coach who told me that you can't run a really good pass game if your quarterback can't make progression reads at a really high level. And I think Mahomes can, but his point was, hey, the exception to that is Mahomes, that, he can be great without really running the progressions. He's just one of those guys. So obviously this is a phenomenal defense. They're really good individually. They could give the Chiefs some real problems. We're talking on a Friday. I don't know what Joe Thuney's status is at this point, but it didn't sound good a day or two ago. So I don't know what the answer to that is. I'm sure he'll do anything possible to try and play. But there are some really difficult matchups here. Justin Matabuke on the inside has probably had as much of an overlooked season as is possible, given that he's on the Ravens and they're the number 1 seed. And I think Kyle Hamilton is really a big key to what they do on defense. So that side of the ball to me is really, really fascinating. But it's hard. It's really hard for me to feel like Mahomes is going to be stymied. Now, whatever that means, I don't know. You could be right, Brownie. Maybe it's a 2017 game. I don't know. But I don't think they're going to shut Patrick Mahomes down.
No, I actually am thinking the same exact way. I think somehow, some way, Mahomes is going to get it done again.
I mean, the play we're just looking at right now.
Say it again.
If I could just say the play we were just looking at right now, that run against your guys last week, to me, that was just Mahomes being so savvy, because what they did is they ran a concept to the right side of the formation, 4 strong, 4 receivers, okay? And the entire Bills defense, because they were in zone, you have to really push to 4 strong, because otherwise you don't have enough bodies. And he saw that immediately. And he just knew that the whole left side of the field, there was not going to be anybody there. And he just took off and ran. I believe it was 28 yards, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
He's just such a smart, savvy player.
What do you think? And so we've talked about this. And he's a hard guy to. He was flawless in this last game against the Bills. And as good as Josh Allen and the Bills' offense played, they couldn't make enough plays to keep him off the field and score enough points. What do you think this game this weekend is going to look like in Baltimore with the Chiefs?
It's a great question. You know what I think is going to happen in this game? Because now you're not worrying about people getting injured or a long season. I think you're going to see a lot more designed quarterback runs by Lamar. They started to do that in the second half last week. It really calmed down the Texans, who blitzed at a much higher percentage than they had all season. And I think Spags does such a good job with his different looks and his pressures. And if you start with the quarterback in the design run game, you really force the defense to have to play true assignment football. And it kind of shrinks your menu a little bit and forces you to not blitz as much, because if you get caught and he's out the gate as a runner, I mean, he is a really difficult guy in the open field. I mean, there's no one like Lamar in that regard. So it would not surprise me if that's one thing, Steve, we see in this game is more design runs by Lamar.
Right. But all that being said, Greg, we saw the Chiefs kind of take an approach that you might anticipate they would take against Lamar. They really didn't have their defensive front rush Josh. They would basically come out of their stance and just hang out. I mean, I've never seen a more inactive Chris Jones on a football field than I did against the Bills last week. He's just playing patty cake with the offensive linemen. They're just kind of hanging out, keeping the passing lanes, closed off. And then it was Drew Tranquil, I believe, a good portion of the time, especially once Willie Gay was out of the game with a neck injury. Drew Tranquil was kind of the spy a lot, and he's a pretty effective one. He can run. I mean, he can't run like Lamar does, but I guess my point here is I wouldn't be surprised if they use a lot of that against Lamar this week.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. There's one play I remember in particular. I think it was on their first possession, and it really stood out to me. It was 3rd and 8 in the red zone, and obviously it was an incompletion because they kicked a field goal on the first possession, where they did what they are going to do. They played their 3-2-6 dime. 6 DBs obviously, but 3 down linemen, 2 linebackers. Gay was the spy on Josh. And it was a 3-man D-line pass rush. And you're probably referencing this play, Brownie. But Jones and Amenahu from the inside, they did not rush. They basically stood where they were to prevent Allen from running up the middle. That was the defense.
Yeah.
Right. And those are kind of they're game plan specific. Obviously, I would doubt that the Chiefs have run that defense. Maybe not at all this year. Maybe like less than a handful of snaps all season. Right.
Look, there's no question that you have to have a defense specific to Lamar movement. Now, think of it this way. The reason why teams say they want to keep quarterbacks in the pocket, whether it's Lamar, whether it's Josh, whether it's Mahomes, is not because those quarterbacks can't win from the pocket. It's because you can play within your defensive structure that you've practiced all week. When quarterbacks leave the pocket, your defensive structure ends. I've had this conversation with coaches, and all they tell me is, hey, after we get beyond like 2.1, 2.5 seconds, if the quarterback still has the ball, it's a whole different animal now. You're not playing the defense that you practiced all week. So it's not that these guys can't throw from the pocket. It's just that you are able to play within what you practiced.
You can't coach what happens next at all.
Right.
Even if you see, you can watch film for a million years and you still don't know what's going to happen after the play's broken down.
Correct. So that's why, both teams will say, maybe not publicly, but they'll say in their meetings, hey, keep Mahomes in the pocket, keep Lamar in the pocket. Not because they can't make throws, but because we want to be able to play our way.
Yeah.
Right.
Flipping it over to the NFC title game, Lions-Niners, obviously Deebo Samuel's availability will be a big part of that, as we know. Was starting to practice yesterday. We assume he'll practice in some capacity again today, so he's trending in the right direction at the very least. But what intrigues you most about this matchup? Because knowing the way the Niners play defense, I would think that Ben Johnson and Dan Campbell will want to keep the heat off of Goff, and and try to use Montgomery and Gibbs an awful lot, especially in the early going.
Yeah, although I will say this, one of the things that's been a little disappointing about the 49ers defense, particularly over the last part of the season, they've not rushed the quarterback the way one would expect, given the talent that they have on the defensive front. Now, Armstead missed a bunch of games, and he's a really important inside pass rusher. But yeah, they're going to run the ball. What they're the best in the league at, and they do at the highest volume this year of any team, was under center play action. And under center play action, I personally think, is far more effective than shotgun play action. And I think something like 90% of Goff's play action throws this year came with him under center. And they do such a good job with that. And it minimizes pass rush. People automatically think, oh, it holds linebackers. Well, it does more than that, especially if there's an outside zone element to the run action. It forces the defensive line's first steps to be lateral, not vertical toward the quarterback. And that gives the quarterback just another beat, another second of time in the pocket, and allows the routes to develop further down the field. And no team throws the ball between the numbers more than the Lions. Goff is a master at that. So I'm really curious. I think the secondary, I don't want to say it's an issue for the Niners, but I think at times it has been this year.
Last one for me, Greg. Finalists, the MVP, Lamar, Josh, those guys are in. What are your thoughts on the MVP? What should the award mean? And maybe were your thoughts on who should win it this year?
Ooh, I'm usually not good at this stuff, Steve, because I think you can look. People always look at teams that win. Lamar seems to be the one who people talk about. Obviously Josh Allen. He scored the most individual touchdowns by a quarterback in the league. They were obviously 6-6, and they ended up winning, 6 in a row to get to the playoffs, obviously, and then they won the first playoff game. Although I don't know when the voting is done, because I don't follow that closely. I mean, there's always a number of guys that are certainly viable options. It always ends up being a quarterback. I mean, you could certainly argue that Christian McCaffrey is incredibly valuable to his team. I think it's going to be viewed, right or wrongly, as Lamar's year. And I will say this about Lamar. He's not a numbers quarterback. I don't think you can look at his passing numbers as a reflection of his value, because they don't play that way, and he's a runner as well. So I don't think you can just look at his pure numbers and say, hey, he doesn't have the big numbers, because I don't think that's the way truly to measure the stress that he puts on defenses.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Greg, thanks for all the insight all season long. Take a well-deserved break, and we'll catch up with you at the Combine in Indy.
I've already started on quarterbacks for the draft, but you guys probably figured that.
Oh yeah,
I would have put money on it.
Yeah.
If you're going to talk, if you're going to talk to us, if you're going to talk to us, make sure you brush up on your wide receiver talk too.
Oh, there's a ton of them this year.
Yeah, Steve. I know. That's why we got to get a couple, hopefully. Thanks, Greg, as always. Greg. We'll catch up with you out in Indy.
All right, guys. Thanks so much.